Hey, what is up? AJ here from Fire from Heaven. Welcome to another live reading of one of my books. If you're not familiar with me, I am fantasy metal. That's what I do. Fantasy Christian metal, if you want to be technical, because it's all Christian themed lyrics and inspired. But anyways, I write books, epic fantasy, fairy tale books. Just finished reading my book, The Storming of Hell. Didn't read through all of the book, kind of skipped around, did some chapters. But that is going to go alongside the album I'm working on called The Hellstormer. So, and there's going to be more than one book in the series, so I'm working on the next book in the series while I read some of my other books for these live readings. So yeah. But you can get these books at firefromheavenshop.com. We're going through my book, At the Mouth of the Great River. Don't make fun of my pink sticky note bookmarker. All right. Let's get into it. I need to get a better mic set up here. All right. Chapter 3. Blood Brothers. "George, are you awake?" Ken asked in a whispered voice. "Yes, I'm still awake," he replied. "I heard what the others were saying to you. I'm sorry that you had to hear all that. I lost my dad. I've never met my mom. I don't know if I ever will. But my dad died the same way, taking his own life. But I was made fun of a lot. That's why I had a separate room from the others, and why my chores now are isolated away from the others. It's also why I guess Mrs. McNeil thought that it was good to put us together. I wasn't sure if you would be like any of the rest of them. I'm glad you aren't. It's very lonely in this place without a friend. Miss Martha is very kind and is my friend, but it's different having a friend of your own age and similar experiences, I guess." "That is quite a refreshing thing to hear, Ken. I have felt quite alone for some time. I've not had a good talk for a long time, even since before my parents passed, till I stayed with the sheriff for a small time. But this first day was quite lonely until I spoke to you. I feel that we are going to be very good friends, Ken." Ken excitedly but quietly got up out of his bed and said to George, "We must take the blood oath to be brothers in heart and to always have each other's backs." "Blood oath?" questioned George, as he quietly got out of bed as well. "Yes," replied Ken, as he took a small screw out of the dresser they shared. He pricked his finger and told George to do the same. Then they put their hands together and swore to be each other's best friend and to always have each other's backs. They then also promised to help with each other's chores to help them get done sooner so they could be together during their free times as well. The next day, George woke with a start to the sound of Ken getting ready. "Come on, George. We have to help Miss Martha get breakfast ready." It was quite early. 5 a.m.? This is when you have to get up? Questioned George as he looked at the clock. "Yes, but I think you'll come to like it when you get used to it. It's so nice because the others are still sleeping, so we don't have to deal with them. And I also get something special from Miss Martha every morning, and I'm sure she'll share some with you if she hears what our plan is. She's a lot nicer than Mrs. McNeil. She even shares a short story with me while we sit and enjoy it." George got out of bed and changed as quick as he could. He was half asleep still, but he stumbled out of the room following Ken. They went down the stairs and into the kitchen behind the dining area, where Miss Martha was sitting at a table in a quiet little corner with a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. There was another cup on the other side of the table, and she was looking down at a very big book. "Miss Martha," exclaimed Ken. "George and I want to help with each other's chores, so George has agreed to get up with me and help breakfast. I'm having trouble reading. I need to drink some more coffee, apparently." Why coffee helps with reading, I don't know. "George has agreed to get up with me and help get breakfast ready, and will help with other meals if his own chores permit it. I will also help him, for Mrs. McNeil is having him take care of the garden, but he doesn't know how to read the instructions, so I'm going to help him as well if I can." Miss Martha, with a smile, responded, "Well, boys, I think that's a wonderful idea. Please come and sit, Ken. I'll get another seat for you, George. As she brought out another chair, she asked George, would you like a cup of coffee? George, with a very big smile, said, yes, please, I would love some. Now they all sat down and sipped on their coffee quietly, while Miss Martha opened up her book to the passage she was reading. She read this: Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves without comparing themselves to someone else, for each should carry their own load. Galatians 6:2-5. What do you boys think the author is saying in these verses? She then asked. I think those kids upstairs should read this, said Ken rather smugly. Then you missed the point, Ken. Try looking over these verses again. Perhaps reading it yourself will help. Try not so much to share what you think, but to think about what the author is saying. Read the verses before and after and get a better idea of what they mean. Then George, after sipping his coffee again, said, It is rather strange that he says both to carry each other's burdens and then says each should carry their own load. Ah, George, you are quite perceptive for one who can't read. I guess when one can't be told things in a book, he must find things out for himself, through looking and thinking very deeply. I didn't even notice that part, said Ken. My mind went straight to how this should apply to someone else and not to myself. I see now it's saying we should all run our own races, so to speak, but also to be helpful to others. George, I think he's talking about two different things. That's why he says both to bear each other's burdens and to carry your own load. We have our own parts to play, our own loads to carry, but we also ought to help each other with our burdens as much as we can. That's right, Ken, you got it now. You see, many times we are so fixated on what we think others ought to be doing that we forget what we ought to be doing. There is also this fact that while the words of God are important, that we must not forsake each other in disagreement over things that it says simply because one has not come to as deep of an understanding as you, or the opposite, that you do not understand something as deeply as your brother. We have to bear with each other, not forsake each other when we do not see eye to eye on things. This is a core teaching found in the Bible all throughout it, that the fulfillment of the law is this thing, to love one another and to bear each other's burdens. If an obsession to a particular teaching causes you to forsake your brother, you ought to look at thyself and whether or not you are merely following your own thoughts in the matter or seeking to know the thoughts of the author. For if you must forsake one teaching for another, you miss the whole of it. You cannot have one or the other. It is either the whole Bible you wish to live by, or just as well not to live by it at all, to forsake one thing it teaches for another. Wisdom is not one-sided, it is two sides of a thing that make it one. If it is not one, then it is not itself. Didn't know you were going to get some Bible teaching lessons in this, did you? There isn't much more that needs to be added to Miss Martha's lesson. I couldn't have said it better myself, dear reader. I have often found such things to be true myself, and that there is many a brother or sister who forsakes those they are called to love simply because of a disagreement on what is many times a trivial matter that is not even such a core teaching, nearer to God's heart and character than the call to love each other and bear each other's burdens. Now then, I challenge you boys to love each other and help each other, even as you are now, without having even been taught this lesson, said Miss Martha. Let's get breakfast going. We will be doing bacon and eggs with some toast. I'll start the bacon, and you two can handle the eggs. We'll start the toast a little later. Ken was excited to show George how to cook the eggs. It was something he always enjoyed. The cooking was much more fun than all the cleaning afterwards. I mustn't fill you in on all the details of cooking and serving breakfast. After doing this, they sat down and ate, and soon George was up with Mr. Worthington doing his first reading lesson. The man was very articulate, but not in the way most gentlemen are, where they speak such large words that a child like George wouldn't understand. He had enough perception to know how to speak and make things known in a way where the listener must still think to gather the answer, for he didn't always entirely give it. He asked many questions, spoke little, and said 10 times more than many of the greatest speakers who speak from the stages and pulpits of today, who talk with many words and say nothing, at least nothing of value to the listener, while at the same time they are very skilled in telling one what to think. But Mr. Worthington taught George how to think. Reading words and gathering knowledge is useless if one does not know what to do with them. Though Mr. Worthington was just teaching George how to read, he taught him much more in one day, than any school would have told him in a year. This is a much greater service to a child than telling, for when one is taught how to think, one can find things out for himself without being told. Being told a truth is valuable, but discovering a truth for oneself is much more valuable. Persons of that sort are nearly extinct to this age, and those who are known are hated for it. I haven't a clue why, only that those who have been told, rather than taught, cannot help think any other way than what they were told, for how can they do otherwise if they haven't been taught to? After the teaching of the basic principles of reading in English, Mr. Worthington wanted to share a story with the boy. He pulled out the same book he had when George first ran into him, The Mouth of the Great River. Here he read this tale for a little more than an hour to George. I shall give a small summary of it. It was a story of a boy named Ben, who loved wandering near that river which is called the Great River, which flows from a great height in the mountains of the land called Midfane, and through all that land and even to our country of America and into the southward sea. The boy had lived near that place where Midfane sometimes meets our world, but it did not describe where. And one day wandering near that place, the boy found himself in Midfane, where the river was very different. Rather than dark and muddy, it was clear and shining, with a slight blue glow. Even at night, it was full of wonderfully colored fish and other swimming creatures. But there were some parts of the river that were not always this way, but were even darker and murkier than the muddiest of rivers on earth. As the boy followed the river, for reasons he knew not why, but had a strange inkling to move ever forward, and that he could not get back home the same way he came, so that is what he did. He soon met a wanderer and asked for directions. The wanderer said, "The only place I know that will take you back to the strange land you call home is at the mouth of the great river." So he kept going and going till he came to the first of those few dark places in the river, where strangely beautiful sounds could be heard, and there was an aura of dreadful beauty. It was there where he met a creature of the river, and that was all that the two read for now. George, feeling as if suddenly woke from the greatest dream he ever had, wanted to hear more. "Please, Mr. Worthington, read a little further," he asked impatiently. "No, George, I'm afraid not. You got to get on down to the new garden area, don't you? Mrs. McNeil tells me you and your friend Ken are working together on your chores, so I'm sure he'll be down there waiting for you at this time." Remembering his duty as a new gardener, he quickly thanked Mr. Worthington and headed back down the long stairs to the bottom, where Mrs. McNeil was waiting to give him a few other needed tools to do his duty that day. "Now be off, boy. Your friend is waiting for you," she said as he walked out the door. Getting down to the garden area, he saw Ken just a little way off fishing at the river, about 30 or so feet down the hill from the place where the garden was. He looked and saw George coming and waved excitedly, holding up a large fish. He ran up with it and said he had caught 2 others, that he put in a bucket, planning to cook them over a fire for lunch. Mrs. McNeil did not send them much for lunch that day. She always tried to make them suffer in some form or another for no reason at all. She simply did not like the idea of the boys working together and protested it to the master of the house, but he insisted upon it, so she would in any way she could sneakily do harm upon the boys. Now you may be beginning to see why the other children were so malevolent as she, for she was like a mother to many of them. The boys, after cleaning the fish, set to planting the seeds in the small cups of dirt and watered them. They then were going to start digging up the hard ground when suddenly they saw Mr. Worthington, and coming behind him were a group of men carrying several loads of lumber. "Boys, I see I've caught you just in time. I won't be having you dig up the ground. I thought I told Mrs. McNeil to tell you I decided to do something else. Instead, I've brought some lumber. With it, you will make raised garden beds. That will allow a lot more time for you to tend the plants and produce, and less time pulling weeds and breaking your backs needlessly. Work smarter and harder, I always say," laughed Mr. Worthington. Mr. Worthington then showed him his plan, a few large boxes here and there, and some smaller ones here, and in each box he had listed what plants should be there. Companion planting. It's a new term, but not really new. Many people have used it in the past. Plant these herbs with this vegetable to keep the bugs off the produce because the smell of it repels them. Mr. Worthington went on a great deal about this, for he had apparently been reading much of it and had wanted to do the garden this way, but the message was somehow not communicated to the boys properly through Mrs. McNeil. The boys then set about building the boxes, and they had a large pile of dirt at one end of the garden to which they would use a wheelbarrow to move dirt to each box. After many hours of tiresome work, they sat down, built a fire, and had lunch. Miss Martha and Ken had prepped for lunch after breakfast so Ken could help George most of the daytime. They also used the remains of the fish to put at the bottom of some of the boxes before they filled it with dirt. It was a hot day, but much was done, and though tiresome, they finished building all the boxes and even set about filling the first. Mr. Worthington came down to meet them and was very impressed, and said they both very well earned a few hours of free time before going back up to the house around 5 o'clock to start cooking supper. Follow yonder trail to a very pretty spot in the river, where you can go swimming if you like. There's also a fresh spring there with very cold water. I still like to walk down to it late at night when you all are asleep and take a dip. The night air in the cold water is very soothing to my old bones. A good walk is helpful as well. There is something magical about that place, I tell you, and it makes me feel young again. Both were very excited at the thought of cold water on a hot day, and they thanked Mr. Worthington and went happily running down the trail towards the place he mentioned. All right, to the new chapter. Don't worry, this is where it picks up and they actually go to like this fantasy world, all right? Chapter 4, The Great River Mother. It was a place full of surreal natural beauty where the main flow of the river overflowed into a small pool. On the opposite side of the pool, they saw a large hole where water flowed out from under the ground, water that was clear and fine to drink. They played rock, paper, scissors to see who would be the first to sit in the icy cold spring, and George ended up losing, so he'd be first. He sat in it for about a minute and could not bear it much longer and leaped out into the warmer water of the pool. Ken did the same, but he lasted 30 seconds longer. The two enjoyed the water for an hour and climbed up on the bank to get ready to leave when they heard a strange sound coming from the water. It was like that of a beautiful song, mingled with the sound of water flowing. Or perhaps the flowing water was the song. They were not sure, but both were enticed to go up the river further and further. It grew foggy, and they could hardly even see each other. They held hands as they walked further towards the sound of what they would soon discover to be the Great River Mother. As they walked out of the fog, they looked and saw a river glowing blue with fish swimming in many different hues. And there stood in the middle a woman. Upon return from this journey, George wrote this of her in his journal. Her gown like liquid silver shimmered in the light. Her eyes like sparkling emeralds held secrets infinite. Her face and skin were fair as snow, and from her the great river did flow. Like the sweet smell of rain carried by the wind, her love and affection would never end. They both were enraptured, not by lust or their own selfishness, but by the surreal and true beauty of the River Mother. Her song was not like that of the siren, seductively enticing, but of real genuine beauty, so inspiring. Neither boy had known the love of a mother very well or at all, yet in this moment they felt they knew an entire life in the arms of a loving mother. Dear children, she now said, the Great One above has called you to this place so that I may show you a great many things. You must follow me through Midfane. At times you will not always see me as you do now, but you must trust me. Follow me now for a little while, but soon I must go, for there are other things I must tend to. But fear not. When that moment comes, I will always be with you, for I am the River Mother, and out of me this river flows. Follow it always, and you will not lose your way. They both nodded and followed silently. The place was so beautiful and strange. Many fish swam deep, but not so deep that they could not see. They now came to a place where the land ended, and all they could see forward was water. No bank to follow, and they called out to her, "River Mother, where must we go?" "Did I not say follow me?" she asked. The two both looked at each other, and George shrugged his shoulders, took a few steps back, and leapt down into the water a few feet below where they stood, only he did not fall into the water, but landed on it as if it were a hard surface. He stood up in awe and looked at Ken. "Come on, Ken, we must trust her completely. Jump in, it will be fine." Ken took a few steps back and ran hesitantly, then stopped right before leaping. "You can do it, Ken," George encouraged. He took a few steps back, ran, and this time leapt, but he landed with a loud splash. Suddenly the River Mother was there to pull him back up. He came out of the water gasping, not out of fear of the water, but he had expected to land as George and was surprised to find he had fell into the water. The River Mother helped him up, and she set him on the top of the water, as her and George were. She said to him, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt? Now follow me, and do not look below at the great beast swimming. Keep your eyes ever set upon me. The water and the waves will grow soon, but my path remains forever true and set upon solid ground amidst the waves." It was a long walk, quiet and somewhat unsettling. The river now became dark and sullen, and waves began to get larger and larger. The two encouraged each other while not taking their eyes off their mother, to keep their eyes set on her and not the world around them. A storm arose as well, and flashes of lightning lit up the sky and revealed shadows in the dark below. But neither brother faltered, and kept their eyes ever fixed on their mother. Soon before George knew what had happened, he was suspended in the air on a bright and shiny day, walking amongst the clouds. What a strange thing he had seen. George looked all about him, and now felt a sensation as if he was falling. He looked down to see that he was falling. He could see the river below, and the River Mother standing there with Ken as well. He looked up and saw a strange thing. I shall try to explain it, but you must forgive me. This strange land of Midfane does not care for such laws as gravity or what we see as reality. From George's description, it transcends those things many times in his story. He looked and saw the mouth from which the great river was flowing. It was at the top of a great mountain, greater than any on earth, and yet it was in a deep valley, deeper than any ocean, and went deep under the earth. He could see a little of that place at the peak, and it was so full of light he could hardly comprehend it. He now found himself landing gently before the River Mother and Ken. Ken was excited to ask what he had seen, and had told him that he would have seen the same if not for his lack of faith when they were called to leap. "I saw a place indescribable, Ken, and it is where we are going, to the River Mother, the spring to all springs, from which her life and abundance flows, pouring out love never ending," said George, with words he never heard nor used before, but somehow found them when attempting to describe what he saw. Now the three had continued ever onward for a few days, never stopping nor tiring. Walking on the water for so long had a strange effect, as if walking on nothing, and almost as if not even walking at all but resting. It was most refreshing. Sometimes one of the boys would ask the mother about this great fish or that strange tree, and many times asking, "What on earth is that, mother?" To which she would often respond, "I am not here to tell you anything but to show you things, and to guide you to a place that shall reveal many more things." Other times she would respond with a question that left them even more confused and prompted deeper reflection in the matter to which they inquired. All right. Let's see. This is a shorter chapter. Maybe I'll read this one real quick. All right. Chapter 5, Honey Glutton. They now came to a clearing where there was no fog or trees but open plains on both sides of the water, and on one side a small cottage. There the mother led the boys and told them they would rest here for a night. You must remember that I am always here for you if you ever need me. Now I have other things I must tend to. Please enter into this place, take and eat, for there will be food inside, and get a long rest, for your journey is just beginning. Do not wander from the river, for I cannot be found anywhere but in the water, and if you wander from me, I cannot help you. If there is water there, however, then I will be as well. The two brothers went into the small cottage and saw a feast on the table. Many loads of delicious bread with butter as well as milk and honey. The two had ate much of their fill on the bread and butter, and had honey on their bread with milk after. Ken enjoyed the honey so much, he began jamming his hand in the jar and pulling out handfuls and shoved them in his mouth, very savagely, as if a bear long starved at last found the honey he had been looking for. Soon he became angry with George for not eating so much honey as he did, for George had eaten his fill long ago, and was beginning to grow concerned with his friend, telling him not to be gluttonous. "I've never tasted something so sweet and delicious, George. How could you not want more of it, and how dare you call me a glutton for wanting it?" he exclaimed. "I never called you a glutton, my friend, but said you shouldn't be gluttonous. I certainly enjoyed my fill of the honey, but don't you remember the proverb? It is not good to eat too much honey, nor is it honorable to search out matters that are too deep. It is like this place. One would break his mind should he try to know how such a world as this, how it works and why. Does not mean he shouldn't search for answers to such questions, but to pace himself when doing so. Some thoughts and questions are too deep for answering, and not profitable for teaching. Many try to go too deep on good things, and then make it a dishonorable thing, of which the fruit is division and disorder. In an attempt to create too much order, disorder will soon follow. In an attempt to enjoy something good, you feel yourself so full to becoming sickly and unable to digest the food as it needs to be, that it may be nutritious for the body. You vomit it all out, therefore receiving nothing. Now the memory of the good thing before it was dishonored is tainted, and you may wish not to even taste of it again. Understanding takes time. One cannot shove it all in at once, and have it be of any use, other than filling himself to a point of bursting asunder. Ken soon withdrew his hand and realized how savagely he had behaved. He apologized and went to wash himself off in the river, for he was covered in honey. George sat and wondered at what he had just seen. A good and God-given need that Ken had was met by the food that was given, and the honey that was sweet. But how quickly and easily the satisfying of a need can become so sour a thing when it goes beyond need and becomes a desperate pursuit to feel the same pleasurable thing. None can deny that a deep longing, when finally filled, is in a sense intoxicating. Any attempt to repeat this can become easily addicting. Only more and more will be demanded to have the same experience until you're so numb to it you'll be willing to sacrifice yourself and hurt others at the expense of receiving it again and again. George saw how there may be evil gin within other things and not just the bottles of strong drink. His parents had attempted to fill a deep longing need in their hearts, one which the gin in the bottle would seemingly occupy for a time, but would soon demand more and more if they wanted him to stay and keep them deceitfully filled. Not all is as it seems, George thought to himself. Then Ken came back in, having washed himself thoroughly. "I'm sorry about that, George. I don't know what came over me." "It's quite all right, Ken, but I would be a hateful brother indeed if I did not tell you that you should try as you might not to do it again, and to seek strength in the Creator of all things," replied George. "You're right. It was a good thing that he filled me. Oh my gosh, why can't I read today? The evil of it was trying to go beyond filling myself purely for the sake of having more pleasure. What good is more of it simply for the pleasure of having more and not profitable for growth? I can't read my own book. This is embarrassing. You can only digest so much at once." The two continued on in much discourse thereafter that was indeed profitable for growth. Growing very tired, they both went up to the loft and fell into deep sleep. Ken woke before George and saw that the table was set with a new feast. There was a new jar of honey filled to the brim. The desire for it drew him down the ladder of the loft. He was ravenous for it, almost to the point of his mouth watering. He took some and ate, thinking he would only eat a little, and before he knew it, he had devoured the whole jar, he thought. Yet each time he reached in, he would pull out another handful. Over and over he did this, till George woke and shouted at him to stop. "Stop telling me what to do, you fool," Ken said in reply. "If you do not have the wisdom to see that what's in this jar is good and clearly from God, and that it is no bad thing to want more of it, then I shall cease from calling you brother, and we shall part ways," exclaimed Ken, with half of his speech muffled by honey being shoved in his mouth. "No thing from God would cause one to forsake another good thing that is from him. You forsake your brother for that jar of honey, and you see me as unwise, because I know when to stop eating honey, and you do not. I do not mean that it is not a gift from God, of course, only that your view of it is not of God, but rather is idolatrous, for it causes you to fixate only on the gift itself, and forget the one who has given it and his ways. For his ways are to love and forgive, to bear with each other, not to abandon your brother when you disagree on such a trivial thing. Too many fixate on the gift to the point of idolizing it, abandon. Oh my gosh, maybe I need to take a deep breath. I can't read. It's early in the morning, okay? Give me a break. All right, let's just try that over. All right. Too many fixate on the gift to the point of idolizing it, abandoning any bond of fellowship with the one who gave it. Though they claim they are pursuing him, they are only pursuing the version of him they wish to see. Many know that great word to which he has given us, but they do not know the one who gave it. Many can give great arguments for their own view of it, but is there even one who can speak of the one who wrote it as if they truly knew him? You eat deeply of the honey, for it is a good thing, but you only want the honey, and not the one who gave it. That is your gravest mistake, dear brother, but not one that is beyond forgiveness. Ken sat contemplating all that George had said, with regretful eyes. He, with the same contempt for himself as before, stood up very shamefully and went to wash himself in the river again. You may now be wondering what it was about the honey that Ken loved so much, that he would nearly make himself so sick on it that he'd part ways with his brother and turn his back on him. I can hardly say, for all I have is what George has shared with me. All that Ken has said of the matter himself, when he looks back, was that in that moment he felt that he was pursuing the one who gave it, and later realized any one of us can be deceived into doing terrible things by such a motive, for the motive itself is good, but our ways of going about it and how we act when pursuing it can be very good or very terrible. So we leave you to think over the matter. It was a good thing, however, when Ken washed himself in the river, for this water was very life-giving and rejuvenating, just as the honey was to George when he ate only his fill and knew when to stop. Ken, with a clear mind, came back in, and the two had decided they would stay there and swim in the river and explore about the land for another day, till they would be back on their journey again. Thank you, George, for sticking by me when I needed you the most, and my mind was clearly clouded. That's what brothers are for, replied George, as he patted Ken on the back. The two now went for a swim in the waters of the great river. They spent nearly the entire day in the river exploring it and trying to catch the fish that dwelt there. Getting out of the water, they both decided to explore a forest not far off, but were mindful that they had maybe 2 or 3 more hours of light and what looked like to be a storm rolling in from the north. As they got near to the forest, it became clear that it was folly, and they'd attempt to explore it tomorrow. All right, might stop there at chapter 6. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want to get the book, you can go to firefromheavenshop.com and check it out.